Take two. We're looking at the issue of sin. This is called hamartiology, sometimes called hamartology. You call it hamartiology, it's from the Greek term hamartia, which is a word for sin. You also have another form, which is more of an adjective, which is hamartolos, the idea of hamartology, the doctrine of sin. Either way you take it, we're dealing with the issue of sin. So we'll be examining different aspects of that, and if all goes well, I'll actually even have some overheads that relate to it. So let's take off now then on Cook's book 276, and that's where we'll start. And then we'll be referring back to the handout that I've given you here on hamartiology, on the nature of sin. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. Where did sin come from? That's the issue. How did sin originate? Actually, in some of the thinking of the fathers, something as the absence of something. Sin is not a thing. Sin is the absence of righteousness. And so it's viewed in a little negative. But there is the question of sin. Well, here's some suggested answers that Cook gives you. The unbiblical answers, he said the possibility of sin being unknowable. And that would say that God didn't know it was coming. He didn't know what hit him. I mean, he was having a blissful eternity. He created angels, and pow, one of them turned his back on him and he caught him off guard. Well, that's a problem for God. Second thing is that it was unavoidable. This attacks the omnipotence of God. That is, that God couldn't stop it. It was going to happen, and He couldn't make it otherwise. Another possibility is that it's eternal. It's always been around with God. We're on 276 in Cook, under suggested answers. It's eternal, and all this attacks the aseity, that is, the self-existence of God and the sovereignty of God. This would mean the world is a dualism. Sin and God are on the same plane. You have something as old as something as eternal, something as powerful as God. So all three of those arguments are not very helpful. So let's look at the biblical arguments on the top of page 277. In some way, sin is part of God's plan. We're going to see more of this in a few minutes, but just keep this in mind. God plans all things, but He does not cause all things. In His plan, He allows things to happen that further His plan. That is, He chooses to allow things to happen that in fact complete what He seeks to accomplish in the world. But He is not the one who creates this thing. God did not create sin. But He certainly did allow it to occur. If you say that sin is something God did not create, but that He couldn't keep it from happening, obviously then you have a problem. So He knew it was going to take place, and He provided for it within His plan. It was not an accident, did not take God by surprise. God knew that when He created a rational being with a will, then the possibility of disobedience to God was possible. And not only did He know it was possible, but since God knows all things, He also knew that it would occur. Now, God could have said, well, I know how to avoid sin. I know Lucifer is going to turn on me, so I'll not create him. That'd be a way to solve it, not create the one you know that's going to cause the problems. Of course, the problem of that is that if God knew that something was going to happen, and then it didn't happen because He chose for the cause and effect relationship for it not to occur, then he couldn't know that it was going to happen. Not know it in reality. Now, he could know all the possibilities. God knows all things, past, present, and future, actual and contingent. God knows everything, what could happen and what does happen. For example, Jesus at one point says, if the things done among you had been done in Sodom and Gomorrah, they would have repented long ago. In other words, if the things done here had been done there, they would have done it differently than you have. That's knowing alternatives in the sense of contingencies. But God not only knew possibilities, He knows actualities, what in fact will occur. And you can't know something will occur if in fact it does not occur in reality. That's nonsense. God's plan includes means as well as ends, and too many of us forget that. There will be people who say, if God knows everything is going to happen and nothing's going to happen other than what God knows is going to happen, why pray? Why? Because God not only determines ends, He determines means to ends. Some people say, well, if people are chosen by God into salvation and it's only the work of God, why preach? Well, because God has means to ends. Or, if you're elected, why believe? Because you'll never be saved apart from it. Because God has ends with means. The same thing here. Sin is a means to an end. It is not the end. God provides for sin by allowing it when He could have not allowed it, and by so doing accomplishes His goals. I don't know any other option. You're welcome to offer one if you have it. Now, is God the responsible author of sin? The answer is an emphatic no. He's not the author of sin because He is absolutely and completely holy, not immorally accountable. God cannot be tempted with evil, we're told in James in the passage here. Notice this further explains two things. Looking in this first paragraph in the middle chapter of page 277, He is untemptable with reference to evil, and He is also emphatically tempts no one. So, let no one say when he is tempted that he is tempted of God. Why we're tempted has a lot to do with us, but God does not tempt us. Which is not to say that God is, on the other hand, not planning your temptation. Understand me, God determines all things external to Himself. But what He determines is that He will not interfere when it comes at that instance. For example, Adam and Eve. That's the first big test. What an ideal opportunity to head it off at the pass, as we would say. I know the whole world's going into sin. I know the whole world's going to be damned because of this sin. I know people are going to die and go to hell because of this situation. Step on it. End of the problem. Or, here comes that serpent, banish him to eternity right then. The Satan. Because the snake probably didn't talk in himself. Remember that Balaam had a donkey that talked? And it's not because he knew good Hebrew. It was a miracle, right? Donkeys don't normally talk. Snakes don't normally talk. But they do if you have a demonic creature working through them. You see it? Same thing. If you have problems with Balaam's donkey, you'll have problems with the snake in the garden, or vice versa. So, if you have a supernatural creature, or creator, in one instance, speaking through an animal, it can talk. Well, the point of it is Satan that's working through that serpent in the garden. God could have banished him, and Adam and Eve would never have been tempted, nor have fallen without the temptation. Wouldn't that be the way to solve the problems? From the first. Except that in so doing, it would have frustrated God's plans for the universe, which includes sin. Questions on that? Anybody have a problem with that? Yes, sir.
If God is omniscient, and He's the creator of all things, then wouldn't it be logical to say that, and I'm just throwing this out there, wouldn't it be logical to say that God created all that is or was or ever will be, therefore, sin being part of His plan, He created that as well. But then that God is the omniscient, so omniscient of God as well.
Well, it's a good question. In other words, if God created everything external to Himself and sin is part of this creation, is it not His creation then? It's a good question. Well, two things. One is that sin is not a thing, so it's not a creation. It's the absence of a thing. Righteousness. It's not a thing. Just like nothing is not a thing. I mean, it has a certain sense of identification, but it's a void of something. It's not something. It's the absence of something is nothing. So sin could be the absence of righteousness. That's one possibility. The second thing is that sin may be an indirect creation, but not a direct creation, and thus differently. Sin could be indirect creation, not direct creation, and thus is not, in that sense, God is not responsible for it any more than He's responsible when somebody beats somebody up and kills them. I mean, He didn't do it. God didn't do it. The fact that He allowed someone else to do it, you could say in one respect is God's fault, but only in an indirect sense. He's not the author of it. He's the permitter of it. And so it's a different question. But that's a really good question, yes.
So He's not the author of sin, but sin is part of His plan.
Correct. By author, we mean He is not the direct cause. He's not the one that makes it happen. He is the one who allows it to happen from sinful people. But if you take it as some scholars have argued, it's the absence of righteousness, not a thing in itself, then it wouldn't even be a creation.
Dr. House, could you comment on Romans where it says, "For all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God"? In lieu of what you just said, the absence of. Would that be the absence of righteousness?
It's the absence of the glory of God. In fact, that's a good passage. For all have sinned, or all sinned. It could be actually not have sinned, because it's an aorist tense in Greek, not a perfect. You can say, for all sinned. And that is, I think, with Adam. When Adam sinned, whether you like it or don't like it, when Adam sinned, you sinned. That's Paul's teaching Romans 5:12, which you'll get here in a little bit. When Adam sinned, you sinned. So take that as an aorist. For all sinned at that point. And now continue to fall short of God's character. I don't particularly like the New English Bible. Again, it tends to be an example of what is called dynamic translation or functional translation, which in my opinion is not true translation. More commentary in the guise of translation. But it is interesting how they translate that passage, for they said, for all sinned and continue to fall short of God's character. Because doxa in Greek, glory, is equivalent to the Hebrew concept of kavod, which is a word that's used in two senses in the Bible, both in Greek and Hebrew Scriptures. One sense is that the magnificent radiance of God's being, like the Shekinah glory, or like the transfiguration of Christ or other contexts, He dwells in a light unapproachable, and so forth. The other sense of that word doxa or kavod is the word of the concept of God's character. What kind of God is He? And in this context, His holiness in reference to sin. So we continue to fall short of God's character. Yeah, like I said the other day, if you make sin so low a standard, just about everybody can meet it. Again, I'm a great high jumper when the thing's not over a couple feet high. Well, that's high to some people. Maybe if you were, 6 inches tall. It's a relative term, right? I mean, high jumper, but I'm not a great high jumper when the standard is high enough. And so God's standard is absolute perfection. Meet that one. See? So we continue to fall short of God's standard. In that respect, you have this sense of not being God. Yes, sir.
Isn't it free will that plays a very important part in that, because God allowed us to have that free will?
Well, let's say we. You mean we in the sense of the human race initially, Adam and Eve? Because Adam and Eve, we are embodied in Adam and Eve. So Adam and Eve had genuine choice to choose evil or good. They had a nature that was not predisposed to sin, unlike us. So He gave them a choice between the two. Now, then again, I don't argue that it was a free choice in the sense that there was any question whatsoever in the mind of God as to what the choice would be. Sometimes the concept of free will, and I'll be talking much more about free will, sometimes the concept of free will is that it means we have the right of contrary choice. And I'm not sure if that's ever really true. See, and this is one reason why you have a group of people today arguing what is called open theism. You've heard of that? I've done 2 books now against that viewpoint. One is called The Battle for God, the other called Charts in Open Theism and Orthodoxy. And when you look at this view, the one reason why they argue that view is this. If God, in fact, knows for certain what will occur, then no one can ever make a decision contrary to that which is known for certain in the mind of God. You can't make a choice contrary to what the choice is going to be. You catch that? You will never make a choice on any issue other than what it is going to be. You can't make truly a contrary choice. Now, you may not know yourself what that contrary choice is. Well, which of the two it is. But in the mind of God, it's known. And you will never decide other than what God knows to be certain. So they argue you really don't have free will. In that sense, I concur. Now, the character of sin is exceedingly sinful, morally evil, lawless. Secondly, one reason why Cook says that God is not the responsible author is because Adam's sin affected the whole race. And Satan's sin affected 1/3 of the angels. So you have this concept, the magnitude of the sinfulness of sin relating the fact that God, who is holy, does not cause sin. Third example, He is not the responsible author of sin because of the character of the creature of God. Now, I would not state it that way because I would not argue that, and I don't think Cook means this, but I wouldn't state it this way. God's not a creature. I might say because of the character of God, or the character of the nature of God, but not the creature of God. I'm sorry. I'm reading this wrong. He's not using it that way. What he's saying here is that God's creature. That's what he means. I thought he was using it another way, and I thought, well, I wouldn't go with that. But the fact of what kind of creature are we? We are creatures who have moral accountability. Now, Berkhoff, Cook quotes, God's eternal decree rendered the entrance of sin into the world certain, but this may not be interpreted so as to make God the cause of sin in the sense of being its responsible author. Okay, so no causation. So why did God permit sin? You've heard of the term theodicy? The word theodicy is a combination of 2 Greek words, as all things are. One is obviously the word theos, which is God. The other is dike, which is the word for the concept of righteousness. So it's a question of whether the righteousness of God is to be impugned or not. Some people say there's sickness and death, evil and destruction. If there were a good God, He would not allow it. Many of the people after the time of the Holocaust argued theodicy. How can there be a God and this happened to us? It's interesting to me that even though you do have millions of people killed in the Holocaust, and that is certainly a grievous sin on the part of the Nazis in doing it, And many people were destroyed in the midst of slavery and other facts of man's inhumanity to man. All sorts of examples of evil in the world. Shouldn't have to look too far. I can't think who it is now, right? It might have been Richard Reinhold Niebuhr. I can't remember. Because he wrote quite an outstanding book on sin. But he said, sin is the only theological point which can clearly be proved by experience. And that may be an overstatement, but it certainly does make the statement that you don't have to look far to be a believer in sin. And so, the whole question of the theodicy, how can there be a God and there be these terrible things, including the Holocaust, including the upwards of 50 million people killed by Stalin as the West liberal press stood by and said nothing, and a third of the population of Cambodia as they said nothing, and as almost 100 million people in China destroyed and they said nothing. I've told students before, when I've taught on the questions of war and peace, all these are occurring during times of peace. Give me war. Give me war. At least I've got something to work with. All these millions, more than all the wars put together in the history of the world, were done in the time of peace, when people weren't at war with anyone but their own subjects. I'd rather have a war. Better chance to survive. So that sin is terrible. Theodicy. How can these things be if God is a righteous God? Well, quite honestly, if God punished people when they deserved to be punished for their sins, no one would be around today. God lets a lot of people work out their own machinations, and then they will suffer a judgment someday, but opportunity for repentance and long-suffering is there. Secondly, I find it interesting that in the centuries of the church's martyrs suffering and dying, you don't really find any records of these guys arguing theodicy. Why wasn't it wrong during the 10 persecutions of the church up to the time of Diocletian? Why wasn't it wrong for them to be slaughtered and murdered and tortured and punished in every way you can imagine? Read Fox's Book of Martyrs. Read church history. Read secular history. The point of it is, terrible, terrible, heinous crimes against Christians. And there was no argument of theodicy. Why? A different view of God. As I believe it was Tertullian said, if not him, somebody like him, that the blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church. So, theodicy, you can come up with it. I gave something to you the other night, Rabbi Kushner's statement, why do bad things happen to good people? That's assuming that these people are good, or that we are good. I like rather, why do good things happen to bad people? That is, we're bad and deserve what we get. The fact that God is gracious and gives us goodness should surprise us, for it's undeserving. So why was sin permitted? Sin was permitted in order to, in God's wisdom, work out in the world a contrast between His holiness and that which is contrary to His holiness. It's a way in which God can work out in the world ultimate glory that could be not known elsewhere. And I'm not going to take a lot of time to develop in this Romans 9, but I think there's something significant there. How can you, as vessels of mercy and grace, in eternity ever appreciate the great grace of God and the death of Christ if it's not in contrast to the opposite? No one fully appreciates the idea of sound until there's silence. You can't fully appreciate sight until there's no sight. You can't fully appreciate light unless you see the contrast with darkness. There's a sense in which what God will do and work out in the destiny of the world, the universe, probably could not be fully appreciated except in contrast to sin. There may be reasons other than that, but I think that's certainly a possibility. 279. The origin of sin, prehistorically considered. Notice the origin of sin is related to the fall of Satan in John 8:44. He is a liar from the beginning. Now, it depends on whether you want to take that to refer to the original lie that he told Adam and Eve in the garden, or whether you want to take that back to the time of Lucifer. But I know this one thing, that lying and sinning is part of his being. From the moment that sin was found in his heart, according to, I think it's Ezekiel 20:28. Now, looking at the original state of human beings on 279, we find the tempter, Satan, soliciting Adam and Eve to sin. First of all, Cook deals with the tempter himself. Now, I said before, he works through a serpent. Why? I don't know. I mean, why not come in some kind of supernatural-looking being? And it might have raised suspicion, I suppose. I don't know. But whatever reason, he worked through an animal, and he accomplished his intent. What was the nature of the temptation? Well, we could read the story. We find out in Genesis chapter 3 that Adam and Eve were in the garden, doing quite well. And God had given a command. Now, this is debatable for sure, but I really do think there's something to be said here for something in the text that we want to look at together. Genesis chapter 3. Now the serpent was more cunning than any beast of the field which Yahweh God had made. And he said to the woman, Has God indeed said, You shall not eat of every tree of the garden? Now, where did God give instructions regarding this issue? You find that in 2:15 following. This is before the woman was created. Only the male of the species is present when this command is given. Notice the statement in 2:15. Then Yahweh God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to tend and to keep it. And Yahweh God commanded the man, saying, Of every tree of the garden you may freely eat, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat, for in the day that you eat of it you shall surely die. And Yahweh God said, It's not good for man to be alone. I will make him a helpmate. And he goes through and he makes a helpmate. But you never find any indication whatsoever in the text that he ever gave any instruction to the woman regarding this. May I suggest, and I think I've got good evidence for it several places in Scripture, but may I suggest here that what you have encountered is the fact that God made man to be the one who would be head of the home and head of the race. That does not mean that a woman is less than a man, any more than the fact that President Bush or Dr. Adams or the pastor of your church or whoever you want is a better and superior person to you because they have a position of authority. Positions of authority do not speak to the nature and the quality of the person. They are only functional in nature, not ontological in nature. Now, I realize some people don't like this idea, and God's statement on that essentially is tough. But God does not change His plans because we do not like the way He decided to do it. And if you think you want to rebel in this life, go ahead, because God has the next life to deal with you. And that's a lot longer to contend with. God has His way of doing things. He is what you call sovereign. And so he doesn't get counsel from anyone to what is the best choice to make. He makes the best choice because he's all wise. Our problem is we think that we are all wise. Okay, just an issue. Now, man was made to be the head of the woman and the head of the race. I can demonstrate that to you. But that does not mean that he is superior to the woman. By no means. Male and female are man. Equally in the image of God. Equal with responsibilities. But there's enough Bible to prove, contrary to the opinions of some in this society today, that God had a certain way to do it. Now, having said that, He made the man responsible for what was going to go on. He not only had a responsibility of authority over Eve, he had a responsibility of protectorate over Eve. He had a job to do to protect his new mate, created out of his side. And we see in the text he fails supremely right up front. Will not be the last man to fail his family. So that he was the first. For he's the one that got the command, and yet you have Satan coming to the Eve and saying, has God indeed said you shall not eat of every tree of the garden? First of all, God didn't, from any evidence we have, give her that instruction. And the woman said, and by the way, you can argue arguments from silence all day long. I mean, I can argue arguments from silence that Eve had two wings on her back. Prove me wrong. Where does it say she didn't? You know, it's that kind of argument. I mean, you can't prove things like that wrong. The question is, the text says one thing. If it says other than that or means other than that, show me. And the woman said to the serpent, we may eat the fruit of the trees of the garden, but of the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, God has said, you shall not eat of it, or you shall touch it, lest you die. Now here's the question. Did two or three possibilities. One is that God said somewhere else, you're not to touch it. Two, Adam told that to her, and he conveyed the information wrongly. Three, Adam told her the right way, and she added information. I see three options. Behind door number 3. No, I don't know.
Question.
Yes.
If Adam had told her wrong, then he would have sinned.
Well, that's an issue. You'd have to decide, is sin incorrect conveyance of information?
Yes.
If it is, then he sinned. If it is, then he didn't. I mean, if your statement is correct, yes, it would have been sin then.
Well, what is your statement over here?
I didn't make a statement. I'm trying to move through this argument. And that's a side argument.
All right.
We can discuss that later. We may eat of the fruit of the trees of the garden, but of the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, God says, you not eat it nor touch it, lest you die. Then the serpent said to the woman, you will not surely die. Now let me ask, it's irrelevant whether, at this juncture of my argument, whether her saying not touch it is from her, Adam, or God. Because she does follow the argument through, you're not to eat of it, and if you do, you're going to die, because that's exactly what God says. He says, don't eat it, for the day you eat of it, you'll die. Okay? At this point, we have a direct contradiction between God and Satan. By the way, that's the way we encounter it. We say, well, we can get by with this. This isn't so bad. God won't care about this one. Or this won't have any impact. Some of the things that we can view to be most innocent can be very devastating. You can make a decision in a split moment of time and it have an impact on you and your life and your family for all your life. In a split second, a bad decision can be a damning decision. And it begins too late to say, oops, can I take it back? Rerun, just like these, we love these video games. You play and play, you get killed, big deal. Get there and start it over and do it again. We'll finally learn all the techniques and take care of them. In real life, you make the wrong decision, you don't get to replay. So here's the situation. You'll not surely die, for God knows that in the day you eat of it, your eyes will be opened. You'll be like God, knowing good and evil. You know what? Satan has a truth here. Only a half-truth, but a truth. Because he does know that the day that they eat it, their eyes will be open to sin, and they will see the distinction between good and evil. Because now, to this point, they haven't known evil, and they'll be able to distinguish evil from good, which is all they've known to this point. So there will be that point of value of seeing the distinction, if you want to say it that way. So when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, that was pleasant to the eyes, and a tree desirable to make one wise, she took of its fruit and ate. She also gave to her husband with her, and he ate. Then the eyes of both of them were opened, and they knew that they were naked, and they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves coverings. Now, you know what? It appears to me in this text that Adam is standing there too. He's not off in some other part of the garden watering the weeds. He's standing right there abdicating his responsibilities. Now, the issue that I guess I look at here is one of two possibilities. That Adam, actually by abdicating his responsibility to Eve at this juncture, actually committed a sin before either one of them partook of the fruit. And that sin, and that Eve being deceived, as I understand 1 Timothy 3 to say, remember it says, the woman was deceived, not the man. She's held to have made a mistake based on improper information. She was deceived to sin. The man sinned looking straight ahead with eyes open. He abdicated his responsibilities, knowing that he had the duty. Now, either that or she was deceived and the man then took the fruit, doesn't even say he resisted, took the fruit and ate it. Did he sin only at the point that he ate the fruit, or did he sin before? I tend to feel he sinned before, because of the relationship that God had established in the garden between man and woman. And Paul, when he talks about Eve in 1 Timothy 3, does not give her the fault of sin coming into the world. She has a judgment on her and her posterity in relationship to that sin that we're not going to get into now. But the man is the one who brought sin into the world of all people. God holds a race responsible, men and women, because of Adam, not of Eve. For the man sinned. Wide open, see. And Paul, in Romans 5:12 following, God imputes sin to the race because of Adam. He was the one responsible, both by being the head and possibly by being the first one to do it. Yes, sir. I think that's the point. That Adam sinned without being deceived. He sinned deliberately with knowledge. Eve sinned through deception.
So you're saying that either Adam initially was abdicating responsibility.
That may have been the sin that actually occurred that brought sin in the race, or either that or the subsequent eating of the fruit. One of the two in that text. I tend to feel it's the former. The abdication of responsibility. And by the way, a sin that still stands with us today, where men abdicate their responsibilities in the home and in the church and other places. Yes?
One of the things that is quite clear in that passage is that Adam's sin was the fact that he hearkened to the voice of his wife.
Where's that now?
It says that he hearkened unto the voice of his wife. That's what God told him, because thou hearkenest to the voice of thy wife.
Okay.
So that was when he messed up there.
3, let me look at it. The woman you gave me, she gave me the tree and I ate, and God said, what is this you've done?
Verse 17.
17, let me look. Then to Adam he said, because you have heeded the voice of your wife and have eaten from the tree which I commanded, you shall not eat of it. Cursed is the ground for your sake. That could be it, but on the other hand, it could be that the curse directly relates to this obedience to his wife when he had prior responsibilities. I mean, I understand why you're saying what you're saying, but I don't think that necessarily negates the fact that he sinned and then heeded this call, and because he did, then God cursed him for that obedience to his wife rather than doing what he knew he should have done. I know there may be several factors going on. We don't see the whole picture. What I say could still be true by this. What is not even said here is the fact that they came to the tree, if they came to the tree together, and it seems they did because of the text. And she's saying, I really like that fruit, don't you? Yeah, I do too. I mean, it could have been at that point, rather than giving her teaching, he just played along. And that may be what it's talking about even. Yes, sir.
Doesn't he ultimately blame God when he says, the woman that you gave me?
Yeah. Not blame himself for sure. Yeah, I've heard that one too. Yes, sir.
Do you think it would have been possible that one or the other of them could have sinned and not the other? Was that possible?
Well, in my way of understanding, if Adam alone had sinned and not Eve, the race would probably, from a federal standpoint, would have still gone into sin. Even though Eve had not committed sin personally at that point. Because sin resides at several levels. One by imputation, one by personal practice, one by inheritance. Eve would not certainly have the sin by inheritance at this point. But she very well could have had sin by a personal experience at a later time. And she probably would have had sin imputed to her, though, through Adam's sin.
Which means that it probably was Adam that had already sinned.
I think that's very likely. But even if it wasn't, if, let's say, he had sinned, let's say the story had been reversed and it was Adam there talking to Satan and he took and ate, whether it was that or the other, either way he would have sinned. And the issue you're dealing with is what if Eve had said, Adam, I can't believe you're doing this. God told us such and such, I'm going home. I'll see you later for supper, whatever. At that point, would Eve have had any sin? I'm saying by the doctrine of imputation, probably so. Because when Adam sinned, the race sinned. And she's part of the race. Even though she had not inherited sin, nor even performed a sin. Because sin's at different levels. 3 forms of sin, we'll talk about that. Penalty, power, presence. We'll get to that later. Right here.
So, eating the fruit was not the sin.
Well, I don't know that that's not true. I'm giving you something to think about. To me, one of two things is a sin. Either he abdicated his responsibility and that was the sin, and obviously eating of the fruit was a sin too. Or I'm wrong about that, which is possible. I try not to be dogmatic about areas that are not real clear. I know people, and you should never be this kind of person, who comes up with entire doctrines and dogmas based on flimsy evidence. Like, why then are you baptized for the dead has created a whole movement. Baptism for the dead in Mormonism. I mean, that is an obscure passage. That can mean any number of things. I've looked myself. There's about 30 different interpretations of that statement. So you don't build dogma on a small statement. I'm just saying this could be the case. Because we clearly have an abdication of responsibility there. His job was to train her in what God taught. He didn't do real good. Yes, so somewhere he blew it. So whichever way you put it. Let me get here for somebody else had something here though.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Is it possible that before Eve even ate from the fruit that the sin was consummated in her mind because it occurs first in the...
Well, I think you're right. Actually, the thing is, if in fact she was reaching for the fruit to eat it, and she's thinking, boy, I can hardly wait to get my teeth into that thing. And she tripped and dropped it. She'd already sinned, probably. I doubt if it's merely in the taking of the bite. It's coming in the surrender to the disobedience. It came before even she took a bite of it. I think it's probably true. Yes.
So she said it was pleasing to the...
Pleasing to the eye. But that doesn't necessarily mean a bad thing. It could be pleasing to the eye and not do it.
Right.
Well, no, it could be pleasing to the eye and not be wrong. I mean, it could be, it's a beautiful fruit.
Right.
I'm just making a statement. It's gorgeous, but we're not supposed to touch it.
But she was attracted to it.
But I suspect it's more than that. But it wouldn't have to be.
Doesn't God tell us what the sin is when He addressed it?
Well, that's what was said back here. I said, the statement you're going with is this thing because you've heeded the voice of your wife and eaten from the tree which I commanded you shall not eat of it, cursed is the ground. The question is, that I'm bringing to you, is that He did not say this, because you've eaten from the tree which I commanded you, you have sinned. He doesn't say that. He doesn't say, because of that I'm going to kill you. You're going to die. The eating from the fruit directly relates to the cursing of the ground, which may be a ramification. But then I'm not pushing it. I just gave you something to think about, but I want to move on.
With that, is it so much, not so much that he listened to the wife, but the fact that he listened with the intent to obey her over the command of God?
And that may be it. But because you've heeded the voice of your wife and have eaten the tree. Now that's two questions, by the way. Look here. Walter, two possibilities here, if you look at it. Those are two statements. Because you have heeded the voice of your wife and have eaten from the tree. Are those two, or is one consequent to the first? Is it this way? We translate it this way. Because you've heeded the voice of your wife, in verse 17 of chapter 3, because you've heeded the voice of your wife, consequently eating the tree, from the tree, which makes it one coming out of the other, are they two side-by-side statements, with either one having impact? And we don't know. But I don't want to take any more time with it. Now, if you'll look on to page 281, I know you want to continue, but I want to finish tonight. I'll talk to you privately. Satan's plan of attack. His attack involved two thrusts, doubt of God's Word, denial of God's Word. And we see both of those already in the text. Now, what is the progress of evil that's given by James? Well, first of all, we find that, and we just said something about this, sin was entertained in thoughts. And so it may very well be that the sin occurred before the bite was taken. The fact that she looked at it, she had to reach for this thing. So here's the fruit on the tree, and she sees it, and it's pleasing, and he says, listen, go take a bite. Did sin only occur when she got it, grabbed it, pulled it down, bit it? What if she had had it in her mouth, and she was just about to bite, and she got stung by a bee and dropped it? It was already sin. Because sin was in the heart before it was in the bite. And I think that is... You don't agree with that?
Yeah, but, there's something to be said about the action.
Yes.
That succeeds the thought. Because there are some times when if you have a thought, and because you don't follow through with the action, there are totally different consequences.
That's exactly true. It's just you haven't committed two sins, only one.
Understand that, however,
Well, good.
are you suggesting that her punishment, their punishment would have been the same if they would have looked at it and desired it, and because God said don't touch it, they refrained?
I have no idea, because I don't know why God even did the punishment that He did. But I do know, I don't know exactly. The text doesn't tell me. It does tell me this, that had she only lusted for it, and not partaken of it, she would nonetheless still have sinned. Now, what would the ramifications been? I don't know. Would God have said, okay, since you only lusted and didn't bite, you won't have pain in childbearing. We'll drop that one. I have no idea. But I do know this, that before she took the bite, she had conceived it in her heart to sin. Yeah, you don't have to perform an act for there to, listen, you don't have to perform an act for there to be sin. But it may be that you didn't commit the second part of the sin, but you committed the first part of it. In other words, I can have adultery in my heart and never commit adultery in the flesh, and I'm still nonetheless held to be guilty. I get all these differences of opinion. I did not expect this kind of argument. You guys are sinners and trying to find ways to excuse yourself. And I'm trying to get and since you obviously recognize that you are sinners by your way of excuses, we'll need to get to salvation any time now. Satan sinned at the moment he conceived in his heart to rebel against God. At that instant he sinned. Sin always is preceded in the heart before it's in the action. Yeah.
But there's a qualifier here. The qualifier is in Scripture. It says, if you eat. It didn't say if you desire to eat. Right. It says if you eat.
Questions of man. You got to deal with that. Come on, man. It's hard. Look at the woman get sinned already. You got to deal with that. Are we arguing on silence or what the text says?
Now, let me say something. Let me say something, folks. Okay, the preacher's corner back there in the back, calm down. I really do plan on finishing this lecture tonight.
All right, come on.
And, 5 minutes. I'm just getting going. I got more to get through, guys. So let me just conclude this discussion by indicating the fact that, yes, it does say, the day that you eat of it, you shall surely die. But then and again, in the mind of God, He knew that they would eat of it, and in that day they would die. But I do think you still cannot separate the motion and the action in the heart from each other. And I think we find out throughout Scripture if we understand Scripture to interpret Scripture. Moving right along. So we have sin coming out in Eve's thoughts, not resisting. And we find that, notice the sin was not the eating of the fruit, but the disobedience to God. Nothing wrong with eating fruit, something wrong about disobedience. On the other hand, she was beguiled. We talked about that. Fully deceived. Now, shame comes about with sin. Matter of fact, one of the features that Paul the Apostle speaks of when he talks about Romans chapter 1 and about some people who burn in lust, men with men, women with women. And one of the greatest features says that they don't have shame. They don't have shame. And he says that the things done by them in private are not even something to be spoken about in public. And that's why you never hear it on television, anybody explaining what is going on here. One could do a very good anatomical discussion of these matters that are common sense, that a person should be able to figure out. But as a person who has spent considerable time reading and working in this area, I wrote a book dealing with this question. It's somewhat disgusting, quite honestly. And I understand Paul very well. But what oftentimes comes, until there is a desensitized conscience, that's the key. Their conscience was fresh. Their sin was new. But sometimes when you sin and sin and sin, your conscience becomes seared, and what should occur, that is shame, ceases to be expressed. But thirdly, there is separation. Separation from God. But not only separation from God, separation from one another. Separation from one another. Sin brings disaster in its wake. Now, what are the results of the fall? 282, you have several things that take place here. And I just am not going to take the time to read all of this for you because there's just too much to cover. But let me say, please read what Cook has to say here on the results of the fall. What happens in the wake of this sin? It brings disaster in reference to men and women, their posterity, and Paul even indicates in Romans chapter 8, brought a devastation to nature. Because nature is in groaning, desiring to be redeemed along with the sons of God. So all those people who are truly earth-friendly, all those people who truly are concerned with saving the planet, the best thing they can do is get saved and become part of the redemption of the sons of God, for that is when nature gets its second wind. Now, chapters 24 and 25 and 26, okay, we've read those now. No, we're going to have to go into those. I've got to cover them because it leads up to the whole issue of justification. Unless we have an understanding of these, we in fact will not understand what we're going to say in a few minutes. So we're going to take a short break here in just a minute. How much time we have? 2 minutes? I'll talk. Let me take a couple questions. Yes?
Why is it that man's identity is tied into what he does in his relation to God?
Man's identity is tied into what he does? I'm not sure. I don't know where you're going with that. I know, but I'm trying to figure out what that was that I said.
You said men are more sexual driven than women. And we are,
I'm not arguing that point here.
We're not talking about sexuality.
Okay.
In the scheme of understanding science, understanding God, and his makeup of the universe, you ask a man, well, who are you? And, well, I work for such and such.
Okay, I see. Why is a man connected to his work, whereas a woman is more connected to other things? Is that what you're saying? Well, there's a sense in which that's true, but it's probably pushing it too far.
Makeup and his relationship to God. If man does not know himself in relation to his environment, and know that environment it was universally created by God, then ultimately he doesn't know God. You understand where I'm going? So I want to know, why is it? Is it something that sin develops, that the enemy keeps us confused about, that we don't really know our connection, our relationship with God? Because once man figures out his relationship, or who he really is, he knows God.
I don't think that what things we do are the defining points of our identity before God. First of all, how God views us is not that way. God views us based on the fact that He has created us. Being His creation identifies us with Him. Sometimes how we see ourselves can be defined somewhat by what we do, in the sense that what consumes our energies and our interest and a lot of our time then somewhat becomes so much of a part of us that we identify ourselves with it. But our first identity should be that we have worth not because of what we do, which is an economic argument, but because of who we are, imago Dei. That is, my worth comes not from my being a teacher or my being a father or my being something else. My worth comes from the fact that I am God's creation. I'm in His image. But that's true of men or women.
Okay, but because God's order is man